Hi, today I'm going to make a Tale of Two Cities Section 2 review video here. So as you guys remember, in Section 2, there is a cross-examination going on between the Attorney General and some of the witness from a defense side here. We have Jarvis Lorry and Lucy Manet. So here in Section 2, Attorney General is asking question to Jarvis Lorry, and after Jarvis Lorry is asking question to Lucy Manet. In other words, Attorney General is conducting cross-examination against Jarvis Lorry and cross-examination against Lucy Manet here. So here in our text, Mr. Lorry, look upon the prisoner. Have you seen him to your certain knowledge before? So Attorney General is asking question to our Mr. Lorry, and the prisoner, as you guys all know, referred to Charles Danny. So Attorney General is asking Mr. Lorry if he has seen Charles Danny before, and Jarvis Lorry answered, "Yes, I have. When? I was returning from France a few days afterward at Calais. The prisoner came aboard package ship in which I returned and made a voyage with me." So package ship refers to a ferry that travels between France and London here. So Mr. Jarvis Lorry says, "I was returning from France a few days afterward at the Calais." Calais is the name of a city where the France harbor is located. And the Charles Danny came on board with the same ferry with Jarvis Lorry, according to Jarvis. And at what hour did he come aboard? Attorney General asked, "What time Charles Danny came on board?" "At a little after midnight." So Jarvis Lorry answered, "Mr. Charles Danny came a little after midnight, 12 o'clock. And in the dead of the night, was he the only passenger who came on board at that untimely hour?" So untimely means odd and strange. So Attorney General is framing Charles Danny by using language like "in the dead of the night, he came alone on board in such an odd, untimely hour." So Attorney General makes Charles Danny intentionally sounds like Charles Danny came on this strange hour at midnight when nobody is getting on ship, and he came alone in the dead of the night. So by using this language, Attorney General is framing that Charles Danny behavior is suspicious and quite strange and act like a spy. Came aboard at right after midnight alone. And Jarvis Lorry says he happened to be the only one. So happen to, it means like he didn't mean to. Charles Danny didn't mean to come at this untimely hour here. Jarvis Lorry tried to defend Charles Danny by using happen to, like accidentally. Charles Danny accidentally come at this after midnight, came on board. However, Attorney General says, "Never mind about happening, Mr. Lorry." So Attorney General says, "Mr. Lorry, don't use your opinion when answering my question. Don't say happening. Don't say Charles Danny accidentally came after the midnight. Just state the fact." Attorney General is threatening Mr. Lorry to say the fact only. So he was the only passenger who came aboard in dead of the night. So again, Attorney General asked to Mr. Jarvis Lorry, he was the only passenger in that strange hour? And Jarvis Lorry answered, "Yes, he was." "Were you traveling alone, Mr. Lorry, or with any companion?" Again, Attorney General asked another question. "Mr. Lorry, were you alone on the ship, or were you with another companion?" Companion means people who are traveling together, or people who are acting together. In other words, we can say companion is like a friend. So Attorney General is asking, "Mr. Lorry, were you with your friend on a ship, or were you traveling alone?" Attorney General asked. And Jarvis Lorry says, "With two companions, a gentleman and lady. They are here." So Jarvis Lorry answers, "I was traveling with my two companions, my two friends, a gentleman and lady, and they are here." Jarvis Lorry answers. And now, Miss Manette, Attorney General is calling upon Miss Manette as a witness. Again, this is a beginning of a cross-examination of Miss Manette from Attorney General. The young lady, to whom all eyes had been turned before and were now turned again, stood up where she had sat. So when Miss Manette came in the court, everybody was curious. Everybody looked at Miss Janet because she was so young and so beautiful. Now she is called upon by the Attorney General, and now Miss Manette is standing at the witness box. So everybody again here, now they are looking at Miss Manette for the second time. So everybody, all the eyes, everyone was looking at Miss Manette first when she first entered the courtroom. Now they are looking at her again when she is standing in the witness box. So her father rose with her and kept her hand drawn through his arm. So when Miss Manette stood up, her father, Dr. Manette, also stood with the daughter together. And Attorney General says, Miss Manette, look upon the prisoner. And Attorney General ordered Miss Manette to look at Charles Danny. To be confronted with such pity and such earnest youth and beauty was far more trying to the accused than to be confronted with all the crowd. So here the accused, it refers to Charles Danny. So from Charles Danny's point of view, to be confronted with such pity. So from Charles Danny's point of view, confronting with Miss Manette. Miss Manette has such a great pity and such a great compassion to Charles Danny. So confronting with Miss Manette was really far more difficult to Charles Danny than confronting with all the crowd. Here in the court, there are many spectators. Everybody is looking at Charles Danny. Everybody is doing some cursing, screaming, saying the bad word against Charles Danny because they all believe Charles Danny is guilty. They all believe that Charles Danny is a traitor. When everybody was screaming against Charles Danny wasn't really intimidated much. He still could maintain his calm because he didn't really care about those spectators. However, now Miss Lucy is in the witness box and she is looking at Charles Danny with pity, and she is very young and she is very beautiful, and confronting Miss Manette was really trying, really difficult and challenging to Charles Danny. So it was more challenging to confront Miss Danny in the witness box than confronting with all the mad crowd in the court from Charles Danny's point of view. And standing, as it were, apart with her on the edge of a grave, not all the staring curiously that looked on could for the moment nerve him to remain quite still. Now, Charles Danny is standing apart with her on the edge of his grave. So Miss Manette is standing across in the witness box, and Charles Danny is standing in his own position. It feels like Charles Danny is standing at the edge of his own grave. And not all the staring curiosity that looked on. So now all the other spectators are looking at Charles Danny. All those staring of everybody could not stop him to remain quite still. So now Charles Danny is standing across Miss Manette, and he feels very nervous inside. So although there are so many spectators staring at Charles Danny with curiosity, but Charles Danny somehow could not stop himself from getting confused or getting agitated. Charles Danny cannot maintain his calm standing across Miss Manette because he feels quite intimidated. It's very difficult for Charles Danny. Although many spectators are looking at Charles Danny in the court, he could not maintain his calm. So it implies that Charles Danny feels quite special emotion to Lucy Manette. His hurried right hand parceled out a herb before him into imaginary bed of flower in garden, and his effort to control and steady his breathing shook the lips from which the color rushed to his heart. So Charles Darnay is very intimidated by looking at Lucy Manet. So he hurried accidentally shake his right hand, and he scattered all the herb in front of him. Do you remember when Charles Darnay first came into his own position in the bar? He didn't move much. So although there were scattered herb in front of him, a lot of herb in front of him, he didn't touch any of this herb because Charles Darnay maintained calm here. But now he could not maintain his calm anymore, so he scattered the herb in front of him. So which means that now he is agitated, he is intimidated, and he cannot control of himself, and so he scattered the herb accidentally, and this herb fall into the imaginary bed of flower in a garden. So it fell into the flower garden. So maybe Charles Dickens, our writer, wants to imply in this sentence that Charles Darnay feels something. He feels some emotion toward Lucy Manet because the herb fall into the imaginary bed of flower in the garden here. So the herb fell into the beautiful flower in the garden, meaning that Charles Darnay feels some emotion, positive special emotion to Miss Darnay. And his effort to control and steady his breathing shook the lips. So Charles Darnay tried to control his breath. He tried to steady his breath. However, his effort make his lips color rush to his heart. So normally our lips color is red, and those red color rush to his heart. So red color all went inside his heart, and his lips maybe looks quite white now. And again, it implies that Charles Darnay is quite nervous. Now his lips become all white because all the color went to his heart. Again, the heart is strongly related to special positive emotion, maybe. So again, this scene implies that Charles Darnay feels quite some emotion toward Miss Lucy Manet here. And our Attorney General asked, Miss Manet, have you seen the prisoner before? And Attorney General asked Miss Manet, has she seen the Charles Darnay before? And she said, yes, sir. Where? On board of the packet ship just now referred to, sir, and on the same occasion. So Miss Manet answered, yes, I saw Charles Darnay on the same ferry that just referred to by Mr. Jarvis Lorry, and I was on the same occasion with Mr. Jarvis Lorry, and I was traveling from France to London, and that's where I saw Charles Darnay for the first time. You are the young lady just now referred to? So Attorney General asked Miss Manet, so you are the young lady that referred by Jarvis Lorry? She says, oh, most unhappily I am. She said, unfortunately, unhappily, yes, I am the same young lady. It refers to that Miss Manet, she does not want to be a witness for the Charles Darnay's case. She doesn't want to do any harm. She doesn't want to do anything negative to Charles Darnay. But now, unhappily, Miss Lucy Manet is standing in this witness box for the case of Charles Darnay. And she feels quite unhappy because she knows that anything that she says about Charles Darnay might work against him. So she is unhappy. The plaintive tone of her compassion merged into the less musical voice of Judge as he said something fiercely, answer the question put to you, and make no remark upon him. So when Miss Manet answered, oh, most unhappily I am, in her tone, in her voice, there was a sound of compassion. There was a sound of emotion toward Charles Darnay. So upon listening to compassion in the tone of Lucy Manet, Attorney General immediately stops Lucy Manet for using that emotional sentence and says, answer the question put to you and make no remark upon them. So Attorney General basically saying, Miss Manet, don't explain anything like unhappy or don't use any emotional word, don't use any compassionate word for Charles Darnay. Instead, just answer the question directly, factfully. So again, this Attorney General is trying to frame this question, try to manipulate the Miss Manet's answer here. So Miss Manet, had you any conversation with the prisoner on the passage across the channel? So Attorney General asked, okay, Miss Manet, have you had any conversation with the Charles Daney when you crossed the channel? Channel refers to the ocean between France and London. Okay, so Dover Channel. So when you crossed the Dover Channel, did you have any conversation with Charles Daney? And Miss Manet said, yes, sir. I had a conversation with him. Let me interrupt you for a moment. Had he come aboard alone? So Attorney General again asked, okay, Miss Manet, when Charles Daney get on the board, was he alone? And Miss Manet says, no. How many were with him? 2 French gentlemen. So according to Miss Manet, Charles Daney came on board with 2 other French gentlemen. Had they conferred together? Confer means have a conversation together. So Attorney General asked Miss Manet, so do they had a conversation together? Yes, they had conferred together until the last moment when it was necessary for the French gentlemen to be landed in their boat. So Miss Manet is saying, yes, I saw Charles Daney and 2 French gentlemen having conversation until the last moment when our ferry needed to depart to London. So these 2 French gentlemen, they had to be landed on their own boat, so they go back to the harbor, French harbor. And had any papers been handed about among them similar to these lists? So Attorney General is asking Ms. Manet whether she saw any kind of list is exchanged between French gentlemen and Charles Daney. Some papers had been handed about among them, but I don't know what papers. So Ms. Manet answered, yes, it seems that some papers had been exchanged between Charles Daney and these 2 French gentlemen, but I don't know exactly what kind of paper it is. Like these in shape and size? So Attorney General asked, so do they exchange the same size list and same size shape list here as I hold it here? Attorney General asked. Possibly, but indeed I don't know, although they stood whispering very near to me. So Ms. Manet says, it's possible that they exchanged this same letter, but I am not sure because they stood at the top of the cabin steps to have a light of the lamp that was hanging there was a dull lamp. And they spoke very low, and I did not hear what they said, and so only that they looked at papers. So Miss Manet is not certain, she is not 100% certain that Charles Daney and these 2 French gentlemen exchanged the same exact list that the Attorney General is holding now. Because at that time, it was a night, little after midnight, and there was a light of lamp on the ship. However, the lamp was weak, was a leather wick lamp. And also, French gentlemen and Charles Daney, they spoke very low voice. So Miss Daney was not 100% sure that what they were talking about. She was not sure whether they exchanged the same list that the Attorney General is holding. Now to the prisoner conversation, Miss Manet. So Attorney General is urging Miss Manet to explain the more detailed, specific content of this conversation between Charles Daney, and these 2 French gentlemen. And Miss Manet says, the prisoner was open in his confidence with me, which arose out of my helpless situation, as he was kind and good and useful to my father, I hope. Bursting into tears, I may not repay him by doing him any harm today. So Miss Manet explains, when she saw Charles Daney first time, Charles Daney looked quite confident. And Charles Daney was very kind and very good. And he was very useful to Miss Manet's father because Charles Daney gave advice to Miss Manet how to take care of Dr. Manet on the windy situation on deck here. So now, bursting into tears, Miss Manet is just extremely worried now. She is crying because anything that she might say to Charles Daney might work against him. So she is quite worried. So she says, I may not repay him by doing him any harm today. So Charles Daney was so kind and he was so good to me, and when he first saw me, and I hope I don't repay him by doing something harm today. because he was so kind and good here. So Miss Manet is just so worried about Charles Danny that her testimony might doing something negative to Charles Danny here. And Miss Manet, if the prisoner does not perfectly understand that you give the evidence, which it is your duty to give, which you must give, and which you cannot escape from giving with great unwillingness, he is the only person present in that condition. So Attorney General says, if Charles Danny cannot understand that your testimony is necessary, that he is the only person present in this condition. Maybe Charles Danny is the only one who does not understand why you need to give us evidence. You have to give us evidence, no matter what it is good for Charles Danny or bad for Charles Danny, because you need to give the evidence, which it is your duty to give. It is your duty, Miss Manet, although you don't want to do it, it's your duty to give your testimony against Charles Danny in this court, therefore, which you must give. So, Miss Danny, you must give your testimony for us, and which you cannot escape from giving with great unwillingness. And also, Miss Manet, you cannot escape from giving your testimony, although you are greatly unwilling to give your testimony against Charles Danny. You cannot escape from giving us a testimony. You must give a testimony with us. It is your duty to give your testimony. And if Charles Danny does not understand why you need to give a testimony for us, maybe he is the only one here in this court who doesn't understand why you need to give us a testimony. Therefore, please go on. Please continue, give us testimony. So basically, Attorney General is saying to Miss Manet, don't cry, Miss Manet, just say what you see. So that's basically what Attorney General says to Miss Manet. So he told me that he was traveling on business of delicate and difficult nature, which might get people in trouble, and he was therefore traveling under an assumed name. So according to Miss Manet, Charles Danny was traveling under a fake name because he is using an assumed name, fake name, because he is doing a business traveling, and this business is quite delicate and difficult nature, so he might harm other people. Other people get in trouble because of his own business. So he is using his fake name at the time, Charles Danny said to Miss Manet. And he said that his business, within a few days, taken him to France and might at intervals take him backward and forward between France and England for a long time to come. Charles Danny also said to Miss Manet, because of what he is doing, he might continue traveling between France and England for a long time. Miss Manet confessed to the court. And did he say anything about America, Miss Manet? Be particular. Attorney General asked questions. So at that time, Charles Danny said anything about America? Be specific, Attorney General asked. And Miss Danny answered, he tried to explain to me how that quarrel had risen, and he said that so far as I could judge, it was a wrong and foolish one on England's part. So Charles Danny says that it was foolish decision of England to have a quarrel, to have a fight between America and England. And he added in a jesting way that perhaps George Washington might again almost as a great name in his history as George III. And in a joking way, Charles Danny also added that maybe the George Washington, the leader of America at the time, might earn a great name in the history as the great king of the George III. So Charles Danny said maybe George Washington is doing something great. So in history, George Washington's name will be as great as the current king George III name, Charles Danny said. But he said in a joking way, not in a serious way. He said in a jesting way. But there was no harm in his way of saying this. It was said laughingly and to beguile the time. So Miss Manet is defending Charles Danny by adding this sentence. So when Charles Danny mentioned a George Washington, he didn't mean to harm anything about the George III, he just said in a joking way, in a laughing way, to beguile the time, to spend time together. So here, so Miss Manet says that she is trying to defend herself here. And in summary, brief summary, now Attorney General continue doing his cross-examination with Jarvis Lorry and Miss Manet. Okay, and I hope it helps your studying, everybody. Again, thank you for watching. Bye.